The single most powerful antidote to living in a distracted world is bringing our focused attention to the present moment. By doing so, we improve our individual and collective well-being. Welcome to UT Health San Antonio Wellbeing Wisdom Podcast, a dose of learning for healthier, happier lives, brought to you by the Office of Human Resources. I am your host, Laura Gottlieb, and our topic today is mindfulness in the age of distraction. We are joined today by our very special guest, Dr. Lisa Smith-Kilpella, an Associate Director of the Center for Research to Advance Community Health, Director of the UT Health San Antonio Dialectical Behavior Therapy Program in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and an Assistant Professor of Medicine in the Division of Geriatrics, Gerontology, and Palliative Medicine. She also holds appointments at the Barshop Institute for Longevity and Aging Studies and the San Antonio Veterans Affairs Geriatric Research Education and Clinical Center. Dr. Smith-Kilpella is a licensed clinical psychologist and implementation scientist working to reduce health disparities through community-engaged research. Welcome, Dr. Smith-Kilpella. We are grateful you're here with us today to share your well-being wisdom on the benefits of mindfulness.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, welcome. To kick things off, please tell us a little about yourself and your professional journey.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me on to talk about this important topic. Mindfulness is something near and dear to my heart. I first got introduced to mindfulness in a more formal way when I was a graduate student at Emory University and had the opportunity to attend an intensive training on dialectical behavior therapy, which is a psychotherapy that is evidence-based for disorders of emotion dysregulation. But it's also considered to be a mindfulness-based type of therapy, where that is a pretty significant part of the work that we do. And I attended this training and kind of fell in love with it. I thought that a lot of the ideas made all the sense in the world, and haven't really looked back since.
Oh, that is incredible. Well, we have the right person today as our guest. I'm so thrilled you're here. There are a lot of people who are coining the term, we're living in the age of distraction. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what it means to be mindful when there are so many inputs competing for our attention.
First off, that is absolutely true. I often, when I talk to folks about this idea of trying to refocus our attention or have moments of mindfulness, I often talk about it as we're kind of swimming upstream. When you think about society today, we are expected to pay attention to a bunch of different things all at once. If you look at, if you turn on the evening news, right, there's 15 different types of information coming straight at you. We are supposed to be parenting while shopping online, while also working, while on Zoom meetings, while checking our email all at the same time. And so it really does sometimes feel like we are so going against the grain of where society is suggesting we should go, that it can be really, really difficult. And so oftentimes what that looks like is first noticing it. And that's often with mindfulness, sort of the first step is noticing where your mind is even at. And once we can do that, we open the doors to being able to choose and work on how to hold our attention, to really be in control of our minds instead of letting our minds control us, and being able to live our lives with our eyes wide open. And so ultimately, we are having to kind of get through all of this frenzied chaos, information coming at us a million different ways. And really with intention, we talk about paying attention on purpose. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of practice. Being in control of your mind instead of your mind being in control of you.
I love this notion of being in control of your mind instead of your mind being in control of you. And it struck me even to record this podcast. I had to put my phone on airplane mode. I had to turn off my Teams notifications. I had to basically close down my Outlook calendar and email just to focus on this one effort. And it does go against the grain, as you said. I even feel a little guilty when I do that, just so I can focus on what's in front of me. And yet, we're sort of trained to believe that we should be great multitaskers, but we're hearing more and more there's a myth of multitasking, and it makes me super curious. Is it even possible to focus on two things at once?
That's a really good question. I think we are, and we're not. Right. So think about those times when you've either, been out to dinner with a friend or a partner, or when you're on a meeting and you see the other person's eyes start drifting to the side and they're kind of going, right. We think that we're effectively having a conversation and responding to an email, or we think that we are effectively listening to someone and texting at the same time or reading the news, and we're not. We're actually I think this is one of the places where the data are the most clear, is that quality really suffers. And it's quality in terms of sort of how well we are, quote, performing in life, right? So like how well we are responding, listening, the accuracy with which we're speaking, those kinds of things. It also takes a major hit on the quality of our experience of life, because if we're constantly trying to divide our attention and not throwing ourselves fully into experiences, we're missing out. So, think about like this is the case. So my in-laws live in Michigan, and my mother-in-law is constantly talking about how she wants to see the kids more and she doesn't see them as much. But then when she comes to visit, the whole time that she's here, she's constantly saying how short of a time they have or how they don't have enough time. And she's not fully getting that experience of being with the kids and the joys and the memories, because her mind is so split between the two places. And so it affects our quality in terms of, again, like accuracy, our quote performance in life, but it also takes a hit on what we're experiencing. And I love that. First of all, thank you for shutting down all of your notifications. I did the same thing, because otherwise they'll bing the whole time, right? And you hit on something so important, which is that you almost feel guilty when we do that. And I think that's really that voice of society in the back of our heads, that we have to be available 24/7. We're checking emails on vacation. We have emails on our phone. We have Teams on our phone, all the things, right? And ultimately, when we keep carrying that weight of feeling like we can't shut off, that we have to be able to be available and we can't miss even an hour of our time, that's really kind of a recipe for feeling burned out on life, because you feel like it's relentless. You feel like you can't ever take a moment and take a breath. And so I think that's another kind of piece of, again, this like our quality of walking through life isn't impacted when we aren't taking pieces of our life all in. Now, I realize you can't do that all the time, but if we can increase the amount of time that we are living our life, noticing the present moment, taking in the world around us, the experience around us, without being stuck in the future or the past, or worrying about what's going on that we're not paying attention to, we actually, our cup becomes more full over time. And so, very long way of saying, is it possible? We think we are, and we're not. They actually did this study a number of years ago. Oh my gosh, I learned about this probably in the early 2000s, where they had 3 groups of students. And so all groups of the students took the exact same math test. So group A took this math test in a room, totally quiet. They just took the test and turned it in. Then group B, they all took the test while there was two people in the corner having a conversation, 2 research like little plants in the corner having a conversation. And then group C took the exact same test, and they had one research confederate, so like a little plant in the corner who was a part of the research team, who was on a cell phone call. And so they only heard one half of the conversation. So easiest question, who did the best on the test?
I would imagine not the person on their phone.
Group A did the best, right? They had no distractions. They were able to sit down in a quiet room and focus on the test.
Yeah.
Where this actually is where people get tripped up, is that the group of students that did the worst is the group that only heard half of the conversation, because they were trying to listen to the conversation, figure out what was going on, take the math test at the same time. And so introducing that, trying to divide our attention, trying to focus on two things at once, quality really suffers.
Yeah, that's an interesting study. I love that example, and the example of, and I've experienced this as well, having family come to visit and they're so focused on their departure, they're not here now. They're worried about the time running out and leaving soon, and often, ruminating about, oh, we don't get together often enough. We live too far apart. So kind of as you said, being either focused on the past or the future, but not in the present moment. And so that brings us to, I'd love for you to define for us mindfulness. What does that mean? And how do you differentiate between other related terms like meditation? I've heard some people use those two terms interchangeably. What is mindfulness? What is meditation? Is there a difference between the two that's important to know about?
That is such a good question. I hear the same thing a lot of times as well, sort of using those terms interchangeably. And it's kind of this funny piece. So myself as a dialectical behavior therapist, with that hat on, part of me doesn't care, because as long as you're paying attention on purpose without judgment, I'm like, it's okay. It's like, it's a function. As long as you're doing that, I don't really care. But in reality, there is a difference when you're sort of talking about more formal meditation and then mindfulness practice. So when we're talking about mindfulness, part of it is kind of a state of mind. It's how you're paying attention. And so we talk about it, attentional control. So think about it like, how like a lighthouse is constantly scanning back and forth. The light is constantly scanning. What we're trying to do with our mind is pause that light and shine it for just a minute even. But the idea that we are on purpose at controlling our attention and holding it where we want it to be is like taking that light and shining it on one specific spot for a little while. The other part of it is having full awareness. So while you're paying attention on purpose, you're also aware of the present moment. And what this can be is aware of what's going on inside or outside of your body. So I could be aware of my heart beating in my chest. I could be aware of thoughts going through my head. Like you mentioned, rumination. I could be aware of ruminating or having my mind kind of stuck in a hamster wheel. I can also be aware of things outside of my body. So I can feel the sunshine on my skin. I can look out and I can see the color of the paint on the walls of my office. But it's having your attention being in that present moment where you are in that moment in time and space, and being fully aware of that experience. And importantly, it's without judgment. It's without saying this is good, this is bad. You can say preference. Like I can look at my kind of orangey, peachy wall colors and say, I prefer a different color, but instead of saying that's bad or that's good. And so you're not judging it. It is the moment it is. And without trying to change it too, you're kind of letting it come and go. So it's just that one moment where you are in that space and time. And that's mindfulness. Now, that's the state of mind side of it. You can also do specific mindfulness practices, and I'm happy to share some of those later if you'd like, where it's more of like the activity itself of practicing it. When you're thinking about meditation, that tends to be a more formal sitting practice, tends to be quieter. I attended a workshop a number of years ago where there was a Zen master who was talking about this difference. And he said, so ultimately, both are really good for you. Both types of paying attention on purpose have so many benefits to your cognitive function, your emotional function, well-being overall. The difference is kind of how you do it. So what he used to talk about is that if you wanted to go outside and you wanted to get wet, you could walk outside when it's just drizzling outside and it's just kind of misting. And so if you stand outside and it's drizzling or misting on you, you're going to get a little bit wet standing outside. You could also go stand under a waterfall. You're getting wet both ways. One is kind of more intense and kind of a heavier hit. And that would be the meditation where you're, doing maybe like a sitting practice for 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes. Mindfulness you can do as you're walking through life. And mindfulness can also be very active, right? So like if you ever pull up next to me when I'm driving my car at a stoplight, you will absolutely see me jamming out in my car. I am a big time car dancer. And so I will be there with like my hands on the steering wheel, bobbing my head, belting out some kind of song. And so I can do that and be very mindful of sort of letting go, having fun, car dancing in the moment, and do that with full attention and without judgment, and having my mind to be totally present in that moment. Whereas meditation is kind of more of that like formal practice. It tends to be a sitting or stationary quiet practice, and you're kind of tuning your attention in, noticing things as they come and go. But both are really beneficial.
Wow, it sounds like they're similar but different and both beneficial. The mindfulness practice, it's interesting the way you described like feeling sunshine on your skin and, being behind the steering wheel and really enjoying the music and getting into that. Seems like a mindfulness practice can offer some of the most stress-free moments of our lives if we just are there for it. If we're just present in that moment, and as you said, not judging it, good, bad, right, wrong, just being there for that moment, whatever it has to offer. There just seems to be some joy in that, in mindfulness. You mentioned too that you'd be willing to share a few starter mindfulness practices. I'm curious, what could some of our listeners try today to become more mindful?
Yes, absolutely. This is my first recommendation is to start small. So a lot of times we talk about it's practice over perfection. And this really is like strengthening a muscle. Or one of my favorite analogies is it's like teaching a puppy dog how to sit, right? So if anybody's ever had a brand new puppy, they're very bouncy, they're very energetic and
Mm-hmm.
joyful.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ever want to teach a puppy dog how to sit and stay, right? What do? Right? You have the puppy's bouncing around, right? Then you maybe like push its little butt down, give it a treat, say sit. How long does it sit for? Like maybe a millisecond, right? And then it's
Mm-hmm.
bouncing around again. And so then what do? You do it again. You push its little butt down, you say sit, you give it a treat, it lasts a second. You do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And over time, that puppy dog eventually learns to sit and keep the little butt down on the ground and stay. And our minds are like that. Our minds are bouncing around. There's lots of stuff in the world to catch our attention, right? That's what a lot of the world around us is designed to do, is actually to capture our attention. And so to learn how to teach your mind to sit and to stay, it absolutely takes practice. And so starting with something small, and by small, I mean shorter in duration, and also something that is more external can be helpful, right? So oftentimes you'll hear about mindfulness or meditation practices where you focus on your breathing. You can absolutely do that. And that is one of the sort of the core practice, is to sit and focus on that sensation of breathing, the feeling of your like chest rising and falling, the air going into your lungs and out of your lungs. That one is hard. I would start with a very short practice on that. If this is your first, just sort of getting into that. The great thing about doing one of those, though, is that very quickly your mind starts to wander. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the most important and yet hardest things is to notice where our mind goes. And that's that muscle. That's the muscle that you're trying to strengthen, is that noticing when your mind wanders and then intentionally bringing it back. So a breath practice like that is really helpful for the purpose of having the opportunity for your mind to wander, noticing it going, oh, there it went again, and bring it back to your breath without judging it, just noticing that that's where your mind went. Now, if you wanted to start with something that is going to maybe capture your mind a little bit more, you can do things that involve external sensations. So brush your teeth really mindfully. If you use like an electronic toothbrush, as you are brushing your teeth, focus only on the feeling of the bristles on your teeth, the bubbles on in your mouth, the buzzing of that toothbrush in your mouth. And if your mind starts to wander to, oh, after I brush my teeth, I have to make sure that I do X, Y, Z before I go to work in the morning, notice it and come back to that sensation of the toothbrush on your teeth. Another one that I love to do is on the elevator. So you're kind of stuck, you're a captive audience. You have no control over how many people get on or off or how many stops, right? And so that can be a 10 to 45-second moment in time where you are stationary. And so pause, notice the elevator, notice the buttons, notice your breathing, take that moment and just kind of be in that present moment. No matter how much you think about it, you're not getting to your destination any quicker. So it's a really nice time
Mhm.
to just notice that present moment, right? You can go for a walk and notice the trees, feel the sun on your skin, notice the breeze. A very kind of straightforward one that a lot of people really like is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so you would notice around you 5 things you can see, right? So if I'm sitting in my office, I might say, I see my computer, my desk, my water bottle, the walls, and the door or something. So you notice 5 things you can see. Then you would want to notice 4 things you can touch. And so it might be the keys of my computer, the top of my desk, my coffee cup, my pen, right? So you're going to notice 4 things you can touch. Then you're going to notice 3 things you can hear. So the air conditioning going, or if somebody hears traffic going outside of their window or birds chirping, right? 2 things that you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can taste. And honestly, you can mix up the order of those. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is that you're taking that pause and you're finding 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with your different senses. And that gives you about a minute of focusing your attention on purpose without judgment. Sometimes one thing that's really helpful is learning how to take a pause before we react, which can be so difficult. And this goes back to that again, like our attention is being pulled in so many different ways. And so how can we give ourselves the tiniest moment before we react? Because oftentimes we live our lives, and this goes back to society is throwing 8 million different types of information at us at any given time. How do you not just live in this way where you're constantly reacting? How do you take back control over where your attention goes? And so one thing that you can do is do a tiny little practice of urge surfing. And so what that means is like when you say you're driving in your car and a song comes on and you think, oh, I want to change the radio station. Don't do it. Even for just 30 seconds. Don't do it. My favorite one that's really difficult is when you're, you're at work, whatever it might be, and that little ding goes off on your phone that says you have a text message or an email. Don't look at it. Give it a minute before you pull up your phone and you look at it, because what you're doing again is strengthening that muscle of pausing before reacting. And sometimes giving us that little bit of space is so helpful in strengthening that attentional muscle and then acting on purpose and then saying, okay, I'm going to choose to now look at my phone. Instead of you hear the bing and it's like this auto, you reach for it and you pull it up and you look at the text message. Take that pause. And so you can really incorporate it into so many different things that you do throughout the day. So anything, you could do really anything mindfully. You can wash dishes mindfully. You can vacuum mindfully. You can have a conversation mindfully. Now that's one I'm going to tell you right now, being very mindful in conversations is so beneficial for relationships, because think about, again, like if you've been on a date and the person has their cell phone sitting on the table and they're talking and they kind of look down at their phone or they get their phone out, like as the other person, that doesn't feel very good, right? Like you kind of feel like, oh, what's going on? Like, am I not that interesting? You're not paying attention. When you put your attention fully into a conversation, the other person, it feels so good to have somebody paying attention to you and really listening to you and really responding to what you have to say. And so doing that can be so great for relationships too. So those are kind of a wide variety of types of things that people can try.
That's amazing. I'm really struck by the variety of different options. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is really noticing everything around you, using all of your senses to be present with what's there. And this idea of pausing before reacting. And it makes me think of really that's what emotional intelligence is. It's having that awareness and pausing before reacting. It makes me think of my favorite quote of all time by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And so cultivating these spaces, and even in conversation, being a mindful conversationalist. One thing I notice, if I'm more mindful in conversation, I do a lot more listening than talking, which I think improves my relationships. So I love all of your recommendations. And tying back to what you said earlier about your work in dialectical behavior therapy, I'm wondering if you could describe for us how all of these practices can impact our overall mental health and well-being, in the short term, long term, over time. How does this benefit us? You mentioned almost like exercising a muscle.
Absolutely. Ultimately, a lot of times where some of the unwanted emotions come from are things that happened in the past and things in the future that haven't happened yet. So it's worrying about something that's coming down the pike, right? It's worrying about a hard conversation you may have to have, or worrying about hitting a deadline at work, or worrying you may not know the answer at work when you're asked a question. Or maybe it's dwelling on something that's happened in the past, a fight you got into with your partner the night before, or you said something you didn't mean to say, or a mistake that you made, or for students, like a bad grade you got on your last test, whatever it might be. So often the present moment isn't quite as miserable as our minds can be. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to have pain in the present moment. It's that when we start stacking stresses about the future or dwelling from the past into that present moment, that's when pain can actually turn into suffering. And so when we experience something painful and we feel it in that moment without letting our minds go to the future of all of the what ifs, or how will this happen? How will I be able to cope? Or this will never end, right? The amount of times when we've been in the height of emotion and had that thought, like, this is never going to get any better, that actually does make that present moment a little bit worse. Now, letting go of that isn't going to suddenly make the present moment joyful if it's truly painful. What it does is it doesn't add more distress and turn it more into suffering. And so that's one of the ways in which mindfulness can be very, very helpful, is that it allows us that experiencing the present moment as is, the joys and the pains, without making it worse, without kind of stacking more stress, more worries, more pain, more suffering into that present moment. Now, mindfulness is not going to solve all the world's problems. What it does is that if something's going on, if you're stressed out, if you're mad, if you're sad, if you're heartbroken, whatever it might be, and you can keep that, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, you're at a 6, right? And then you start stressing about what's to come and it gets it up to a 9. Actually, a 6 is way better. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah.
But what it does is it at least doesn't stack more onto your plate when you're already dealing with so much. And so that gives us a little bit more capacity to move forward. And really that's what it's about, is it's about having a pain that you can move forward with when those moments are painful. Now, the flip side of it is that you also fill your cup. When we talked about relatives when they're out of town, instead of feeling refilled, like filling your cup, feeling totally replenished, having quality experiences. I mean, humans, we are a social creatures, like that. We are a species that thrives on social connection. And so when we have those moments of close connection and meaningful interactions and spending time together, that does help repair us, that restores us, that helps us, feel more energetic. And that can be the case too with even downtime, right? If you take a pause in the middle of a busy day, if you had one of those days where it's just like go 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 go, and you take one pause for a minute or two, it's not going to take the workload off your plate, don't get me wrong. What it's going to do is it's going to help you to settle a little bit, and then you can move forward. Right. So that's how it can kind of be helpful in navigating some of the emotions that come up from day to day. Now, there are all kinds of really awesome studies out there, including like imaging studies with Buddhist monks, that show how effective it is for cognitive functioning, because the more, again, that we strengthen that attentional muscle, the stronger that it becomes. And so ultimately, so I'm a researcher, I have to write grants for a living. If I can pay attention on purpose for a long stretch of time where I'm very focused on working on a grant application or something, that's going to be beneficial. I'm going to produce better work because I'm able to keep my attention and hold it there. So it can be helpful for those kinds of things as well. And then lastly, I think for health behaviors in general, it can be very helpful. So for instance, when we're laying down to go to sleep at night and that mind starts going about all the things we have to do the next day or all the things we didn't get done that day, we're laying in bed. We're not actually doing anything about it. We're just laying there being miserable and not falling asleep, and everything feels worse in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. And so having the ability to let go of the mind being in the past or the future and be in that present moment can help you to do things like fall asleep at night, right? Of many other sleep hygiene tips as well, but that can be something where it comes into play. Being mindful while exercising is actually really, really helpful. So there have been studies where people who, while you're doing an exercise, whether it's, walking or biking or running or lifting weights or whatever it might be, really paying attention to that experience of exercise has a much more beneficial effect on exercise, on your physical health. The more that we can help to take steps and kind of de-escalate the physiological arousal that comes with stress, that can help kind of mitigate some of those effects of stress. And so, again, it's not going to solve all the world's problems, and it can be very helpful, especially because when you add it up over time and you feel like you have more control over your emotions, more control over where your mind takes you, and are able to have those moments that refill your cup, overall, that does add up to feeling better and well-being, mental health, physical health. It can really add up.
That's pretty incredible. The overall mental health and well-being benefits of mindfulness. And I have one maybe final bonus question for you. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about feeling guilty, about, kind of focusing one's attention, unplugging from other things to do that effectively. And you had mentioned mindful pauses. And my experience with that is it feels so good. It feels a little self-indulgent. And so, what do you recommend for someone who knows that mindfulness is good for them? They have that feel-good experience of it. They know it enhances their effectiveness, their efficiency. They're able to get things done more joyfully. And yet there's this sort of little nagging, like, oh, well, this feels too good. It must be, self-indulgent in some way. So do you have any recommendations for someone who might be struggling with that?
My first response is that you're human. That's really kind of such a common human experience, especially this day and age, is that we've over dichotomized, complete self-sacrifice and misery and guilt with then the only other option is self-indulgence, right? And ultimately, I think it comes back to think about the flip side of it. So if you, Laura, are going to turn off your emails, your Teams messages, and your phone to have this conversation with me for half an hour, if you were sitting here feeling guilty about it the whole time, is it doing either of us any good?
Absolutely not.
So it's not, so like the flip side of it is it's not actually adding anything to hold on to the guilt. It's sort of this myth that if we're going to do something and we're going to feel guilty about it the whole time, that somehow we're like making up for it or something. And that's really a myth, because ultimately feeling guilty while doing it doesn't change anything. And in fact, it may take away from it. And so I think there's a reframing of truly what is self-indulgent, right? Is it truly self-indulgent to let yourself fully focus on a task? Is it truly self-indulgent to just not be miserable? Like, I think we have to find that shade of gray in between and allow ourselves to let go of that, because I think on some level, a lot of that comes from a judgment, right? So judgmental thinking, judging
Mm-hmm.
ourselves as whether we don't deserve to feel good, or we don't deserve to have this moment, or whatever, somebody who's taken self-indulgence to a level where it's negatively affected other people, whatever it might be. that is actually kind of a judgment in and of itself. And so noticing I'm having the thought that this is self-indulgent and letting it go and coming back to what's actually effective. When I
Mm.
think about what's important in my life, when I think about my goals and my values, is it really effective to hold on to that guilt when I'm doing things? Or is it more effective to refocus, let go of those judgments about myself or other people or whatever it might be, and instead live in that present moment? Will that actually help me get to my goals and values more effectively? And typically the answer is yes. And so, kind of like, is it effective? Is it really effective for me to do this? Or is it some kind of myth that I'm holding on to? And then again, everybody does it. Like, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. I was just having a conversation with a colleague about that this morning. I'm like overusing Amazon and the guilt, and that I still do it. And I hit, I still purchase on Amazon and I feel guilty. It's like, I'm going to do it anyway. At least like let go of the guilt and refocus on the other things that I'm doing with my time instead. And we've all been there. But my question is it effective?
I think that's a wonderful reframe. I love how you normalize it. We're all human here. We do these things. And yet, does it serve us? Does it serve the present moment? Does it serve those that, we may be working for or with, and sort of letting go of the judgment? And I think that brings us full circle to part of what you said in terms of one of those aspects of mindfulness is noticing what's happening in the moment without judgment. And so giving ourselves some permission to not judge ourselves when we're doing that, I think is wonderful. As you heard from our expert guest today, mindfulness is a powerful practice with the potential to improve our mental performance, emotional intelligence, health, wellness, and overall resilience. Dr. Smith Kilpella, thank you for joining us today and making lives better by sharing your well-being wisdom. Tune in next time when we talk about the importance of relationship health. And until then, take good care.